She had negotiated mergers worth billions without blinking. But the moment a stranger's hands began moving in fluent sign language beside a pond in downtown Chicago, billionaire hotel magnate Vivian Moran felt her entire world tilt. Because in less than 5 minutes, that single father unlocked the joy in her mute daughter she had failed to reach in 8 long years. The wind coming off Lake Michigan carried the last bite of winter as Vivian stood before the glass walls of her penthouse office overlooking the glittering skyline, the city humming beneath her like a machine she alone knew how to operate. At 42, she was the formidable CEO of L'Oran International Hospitality, a luxury empire stretching from Miami to Vancouver. Her name spoken in boardrooms with admiration edged in fear, her platinum hair always swept into a precise knot, her tailored suits as sharp as her negotiation tactics. And yet none of that precision helped her when she stood outside her 12-year-old daughter Lila's bedroom door each night, unsure how to reach her. 8 years earlier, a late-night call from a state trooper outside Milwaukee had shattered her life into before and after. Her husband Andre had been killed instantly in a highway collision, leaving Vivian alone with a grieving 4-year-old and a silence that would soon deepen when doctors confirmed that Lila's rare degenerative vocal cord disorder would permanently prevent her from speaking, though her hearing remained perfectly intact. At first, Vivian attacked the diagnosis the way she attacked hostile takeovers, assembling specialists, speech therapists, experimental treatments flown in from Boston, consultations with neurologists in Zurich. But as hope narrowed, so did her patience. She enrolled in American Sign Language classes twice, maybe 3 times, each attempt colliding with earnings calls, expansion bids, shareholder crises, until the graceful fluidity of true ASL users remained just out of reach. Her own attempts, stiff and fragmented, conversations with Lila reduced to simple gestures, typed notes on tablets, and strained half-understood expressions that left both of them retreating to separate corners of their cavernous Gold Coast mansion. On this particular Saturday, after canceling yet another promised breakfast because of a surprise acquisition call with investors in New York City, Vivian caught her reflection in the hallway mirror and saw not a titan of industry, but a mother perpetually 5 steps behind her child, and something inside her cracked just enough to clear her schedule, silence her assistant, and tell Lila, carefully, imperfectly, that they were going out, just the 2 of them. Lila's cautious smile flickered like a match in the dark as she grabbed her sketchbook, the one filled with detailed cityscapes and expressive charcoal portraits that seemed louder than any voice. They drove in unusual quiet. Unusual because Vivian normally filled silence with calls toward Millennium Park, where tourists clustered around Cloud Gate and children shrieked near the Crown Fountain, the air alive with spring sunlight bouncing off steel and glass. Vivian chose a bench near the small pond tucked behind a row of budding trees, promising herself she would not check her phone, though habit had her glancing at the screen within minutes as Lila drifted a few yards away to sketch. The skyline reflected in water. The guilt was a familiar ache, the awareness that other mothers leaned close to hear whispered stories while she strained to interpret hand movements she should have mastered years ago, and she was just reaching for her device again when a blur of motion caught her eye. A small boy, perhaps 7, sprinting toward Lila with the fearless curiosity only children possess, stopping short when he saw her drawing. Vivian rose instinctively, protective reflex surging, but before she could intervene, the boy's father approached at an easy pace, tall and broad-shouldered in worn jeans and a navy sweater, dark curls brushed back. Carelessly, kindness evident in the set of his mouth, and instead of calling his son back with a sharp command, he did something that made Vivian freeze where she stood. He lifted his hands and began to sign. The movements were fluid, confident, alive, his fingers shaping questions, his eyebrows lifting with grammatical nuance, his posture angled toward Lila in perfect visual respect, and Lila's reaction was instantaneous and breathtaking. Her head snapped up, eyes widening. Then her own hands answered in a rush Vivian had never witnessed at home. Gestures expansive and animated as she explained her drawing, indicating the curve of the skyline, the shimmer of reflected sunlight, the tiny figures she had sketched along the water's edge, and the man responded just as quickly, nodding, laughing silently, signing something playful that made Lila cover her mouth in delighted surprise. The little boy watched, fascinated, then attempted a few enthusiastic signs of his own, clearly practiced if not yet precise. And within seconds the three of them formed a small island of expressive motion in the middle of the bustling park. Their conversation vibrant without a single spoken word. Vivian felt a strange heat rise behind her eyes, part awe, part shame, because she had never seen her daughter so unguarded, so expansive, so utterly herself. When the exchange paused, the man turned, noticing Vivian for the first time, and offered a gentle smile before speaking aloud in a warm, steady voice. "I'm Daniel Reyes," he said. "My son Mateo gets distracted by art." Vivian's throat felt dry. "How do you?" she began, gesturing awkwardly toward his hands. "My younger sister is deaf," Daniel replied simply. "ASL was my first language before English." The simplicity of that statement landed like a verdict. 8 years of wealth, influence, and relentless control had not given Vivian what this man carried so effortlessly. And as she looked back at Lila, still animated, still signing quickly to Daniel about shading techniques and reflections, she understood with painful clarity that her daughter had been waiting not for a cure, not for a miracle, but for someone willing to enter her world fully. Daniel knelt beside Lila, asking permission to see her sketchbook more closely, his son settling cross-legged beside them, and Lila shifted naturally to include Mateo in the conversation, adjusting her signing speed for him in a way Vivian recognized as instinctive leadership. The park noise faded into irrelevance as Vivian watched from a few steps away, suspended between gratitude and humiliation, realizing that a stranger had accomplished in moments what she had postponed for nearly a decade. And for the first time since Andre's death, she felt the sharp, undeniable truth that success had never been the language her daughter needed. By Monday morning, the photographs were everywhere. Grainy images of Billionaire CEO Vivian Laurent standing awkwardly in jeans at Millennium Park, while a casually dressed single father signed animatedly with her daughter, and the business blogs wasted no time crafting their narrative. Laurent distracted? Expansion at risk? From her corner office overlooking Chicago, Vivian watched headlines scroll across her tablet, as if they were stock prices, each one a quiet accusation that she was losing her edge. Her chief operating officer had already left 2 voicemails about investor anxiety in New York City, and a development partner in Dubai was requesting urgent clarification on timelines. But instead of feeling her usual surge of combat-ready focus, Vivian found her thoughts drifting back to the park, the way Lila's shoulders had relaxed, the speed and grace of her signing when she wasn't struggling to simplify herself for her mother's limited vocabulary, the quiet confidence Daniel Reyes carried like second nature. Daniel. Even thinking his name felt like stepping outside her carefully constructed world, and when she reached into her coat pocket and felt the simple business card he had pressed in her hand before leaving. Pilsen Community Center, Saturday ASL Family Circle. She surprised herself by turning it over repeatedly, as if it were a key she hadn't decided whether to use. That evening, she found Lila at the dining room table in their expansive Gold Coast home, sketching the reflective curve of Cloud Gate from memory, and after a long pause, Vivian attempted something new. Instead of her usual clipped gestures, she signed carefully, haltingly, Saturday. Community. Place. Go. Lila's reaction was immediate and electric. Her eyes widened, her hands moving quickly in a flurry Vivian only half understood, but the enthusiasm was unmistakable, and when she slowed down to clarify, Daniel. Mateo. There, Vivian nodded, feeling something fragile and hopeful unfold between them. Saturday arrived gray and windy, Chicago's skyline wrapped in low clouds as mother and daughter drove south toward the Pilsen neighborhood, far from Vivian's polished corporate towers. Murals of vibrant hands covered brick walls near the community center, colors bold and unapologetic, and Vivian felt strangely out of place in her tailored coat among families who looked comfortable in their shared imperfection. Inside, folding chairs formed a wide circle, children darting between parents, conversations unfolding entirely in ASL, with expressive faces and animated gestures that felt like choreography. Daniel stood near a whiteboard, sleeves rolled up, greeting each family with easy warmth, and when he saw Lila, his smile was immediate, Mateo waving enthusiastically beside him. The session began not with lectures, but with movement. Daniel demonstrating spatial referencing, showing how a character could be placed in a specific area of signing space and revisited consistently, explaining with both voice and sign that ASL was not English translated, but its own living language. Vivian struggled at first, her hands stiff, her expressions tentative, but Daniel gently corrected her hand shapes and eyebrow positioning without condescension, and Lila stepped closer, guiding her mother's fingers into proper formation with surprising patience. During a storytelling exercise, children were invited to create a collaborative narrative entirely in sign, each adding a sentence. And to Vivian's astonishment, Lila rose without hesitation, tapping the table to gain attention the way Daniel had modeled. She signed confidently, establishing a hero on her right side and a mischievous villain on her left, her facial expressions shifting dramatically as she moved between roles, the younger children watching in rapt fascination. Mateo added a comedic twist involving a runaway dog, and the room erupted in silent laughter, hands waving in the air instead of applause, and Vivian felt her throat tighten as she realized she was witnessing not the fragile child she had tried to shield, but a leader thriving in community. Daniel stepped beside her during a break, offering paper cups of coffee. She adjusts her pace for the younger ones, he said quietly. That's instinct. You can't teach that. Vivian swallowed. I thought protecting her meant controlling everything around her, she admitted. Maybe it just meant learning her language. Daniel nodded. Sometimes protection is just participation. His words followed her into Monday's board meeting, where tension thickened the air in the conference room overlooking the Chicago River. Executives questioned her priorities, one director bluntly suggesting that public park distractions undermined shareholder confidence. And for a moment Vivian felt the familiar armor rising. But instead of deflecting, she stood and surprised even herself by beginning her presentation in ASL before translating aloud. She projected demographic data onto the screen. Hundreds of thousands of primary ASL users in the United States, millions more connected to the deaf community, and then she outlined a strategic pivot, retrofitting Loron properties with visual alert systems, offering video concierge services, training front desk staff in basic ASL, redesigning conference spaces to maximize sightlines for visual communication. Accessibility isn't a side project, she said steadily. It's market expansion. A senior investor dialed in from Toronto expressed enthusiastic support, citing untapped hospitality demand, and one by one the objections softened into cautious curiosity. By the end of the meeting, what had begun as criticism transformed into approval for a pilot program across 3 flagship hotels. And as Vivian walked back to her office, she realized that the courage she had found in a community center in Pilsen was reshaping not only her relationship with her daughter, but the trajectory of her empire. That Saturday, she returned to the ASL circle with less hesitation, her signing slightly more fluid, her posture less guarded. Lila no longer hovered at the edges, but moved easily among peers, and when Daniel caught Vivian's eye across the room, there was a quiet understanding there, something unspoken yet deeply acknowledged, that this was no longer a single encounter in a park, but the beginning of a different kind of investment, one measured not in stock performance, but in shared language, shared growth, and the brave decision to step into a world she should have entered years ago. The night Daniel Reyes signed his proposal beneath the city lights, Vivian Loron realized the most profitable investment of her life had begun the day she chose to sit on a park bench instead of in a boardroom. It happened almost a year after that first encounter at Millennium Park in Chicago, after Saturday ASL circles had become sacred and Loron International's accessibility initiative had quietly transformed from experimental pilot into industry benchmark. Spring had returned, soft and electric, and the skyline shimmered behind them as crowds gathered once again near Cloud Gate, tourists snapping photos while street musicians performed. Vivian stood watching Lila and Mateo chase each other along the lawn, their hands flying in rapid conversation, laughter visible in every expression, and she marveled at how natural it now felt to understand her daughter without translation, to catch subtle eyebrow shifts and shifts in posture that once would have escaped her completely. The year had not been effortless. There were late nights balancing European investors from London, tense negotiations with contractors resistant to retrofitting older properties, and skeptical analysts predicting diminished margins. but each challenge had sharpened rather than shaken her conviction. Inclusive design had opened doors she hadn't known existed. Conference bookings from advocacy organizations tripled. Travel blogs praised Laurent hotels for genuine accessibility rather than performative compliance. And one of the company's largest new partnerships emerged with a design consortium based in San Francisco, specializing in visual communication architecture. More importantly, her home had changed. The once echoing Gold Coast mansion no longer felt like a museum of controlled perfection. Weekends were noisy with movement. Hands signing across the kitchen island. Art supplies scattered across the dining table. Daniel leaning against the counter debating recipe adjustments while attempting to sign and stir simultaneously. Vivian's fluency had deepened not through private tutors, but through daily living. She and Lila developed inside jokes built entirely on visual puns, exaggerating facial grammar for comedic effect, playfully correcting each other's classifier placement during storytelling. Sometimes they would sit together on the terrace overlooking Lake Michigan, signing long conversations about school, about dreams, about Andre, conversations Vivian once feared she would never have. Daniel had moved carefully at first, respectful of the fragile spaces grief leaves behind, but his presence grew steady and essential. He understood when Vivian pulled away under pressure and when Lila needed reassurance without smothering, and Mateo's easy affection bridged moments that might otherwise have felt uncertain. The proposal itself was perfectly Daniel. No orchestra, no spectacle, just a quiet circle of community friends after an outdoor ASL gathering in the park. Mateo and Lila stood side by side holding a hand-painted banner that read "Family is chosen," and Daniel stepped forward, signing his words deliberately, eyes never leaving Vivian's. He spoke of first languages and second chances, of the courage it took to enter someone else's silence and find it filled with music. He asked not only for her hand, but for the continuation of the life they had begun building every Saturday morning. Vivian felt tears gather, but instead of speaking first as she once would have, she answered in ASL, clear, confident, unhesitating, yes. Always yes. The surrounding families lifted their hands in silent applause, fingers fluttering against the twilight sky. And in that moment the woman once defined by quarterly reports understood that leadership at home required the same boldness as leadership in business, a willingness to risk vulnerability for something larger than pride. Their wedding took place the following spring in a botanical garden along the lakefront. Cherry blossoms drifting down like pale confetti, vows exchanged in. Both spoke in English and ASL, interpreters included not as an afterthought, but as honored participants. Lila stood tall beside her mother, signing a short poem she had written about bridges, how they are strongest when anchored on both sides. And Mateo presented the rings with theatrical flourish, nearly dropping one in the grass before catching it to a ripple of amused gasps. Married life blended seamlessly into the rhythms they had already formed. Daniel and Mateo moved into the Gold Coast house at first, but within months Vivian suggested relocating to a renovated brownstone closer to the Pilsen Community Center, a gesture that would have shocked her former self who equated distance from downtown towers with diminished status. Laurent International continued expanding, yet differently. New properties were designed from blueprint stage with visual accessibility as foundation rather than modification, and Vivian instituted internal ASL training sessions that she attended alongside entry-level employees, erasing hierarchical barriers with the simple admission that she, too, was still learning. Industry conferences began inviting her to speak not only about hospitality growth, but about inclusive leadership. During one keynote streamed globally from Toronto, she demonstrated how spatial structuring borrowed from ASL clarified complex merger negotiations, crediting her daughter publicly as her greatest teacher. At home, ordinary evenings felt extraordinary. Lila helping Mateo refine a school art project that visualized sound waves as color gradients. Daniel reviewing lesson plans. He had expanded his community ASL program into a nonprofit organization serving families across Illinois, while Vivian drafted strategic memos at the dining table rather than isolated in a glass office tower. There were still hard days. When Mateo broke his arm during a soccer game, hospital corridors revived old fears, and when a competitor attempted to undercut Laurent's accessibility model as financially reckless, Shareholders grew restless. But unlike before, Vivian no longer faced crises alone. Daniel's steady hand and Lila's unwavering gaze grounded her, reminding her that silence was not emptiness, but space for intention. 5 years after that first meeting by the pond, Lila stood at her high school graduation delivering the valedictory address in ASL, an interpreter voicing her words to a packed auditorium. She spoke about communication beyond sound, about the courage of parents who learn alongside their children, about the day a stranger in a park chose to speak her language and changed her family's future. Vivian sat between Daniel and Mateo, fingers intertwined with theirs, tears unhidden, and when Lila sighed, "My mother once feared my silence. Now she shares it with pride." The applause that followed felt like a lifetime of reconciliation condensed into a single thunderous moment. Later that evening, back at Millennium Park under a sky streaked with violet and gold, the four of them stood near the reflective curve of Cloud Gate, their mirrored images bending together in polished steel. Daniel asked softly, "Ready to go home?" And Lila answered before Vivian could, signing with playful certainty, "We are home." Vivian looked at the family she had built not through acquisition but through courage, and she understood that the empire rising behind her across the Chicago skyline was no longer her greatest achievement. The true triumph was this: learning that love does not demand a voice to be heard, only the humility to listen with your whole being, and the bravery to answer back in kind.